The Scottish Highlands are not merely a landscape. They are a suffocating shroud of grey mist, ancient granite, and the relentless weeping rain that seems to have soaked into the very stone of the crumbling Blackwood Manor. This is a place where history doesn't just linger, it festers. And here, ruling over the decay with a chilling, surgical precision, is Wendy Kane. At 32, Wendy is a woman of terrifying composure, a renowned antiquities hunter, whose reputation is built on the ruins of her competitors. She moves through the manor's hollowed-out corridors with a predator's grace, her figure always impeccably framed by tailored cashmere suits that seem too refined, too sharp, for the rot surrounding her. She is cold, vertical, and utterly unreachable, a woman who appears to have been carved out of the same frigid granite as the castle itself. Then there is Jane Eyre. At 21, she is everything Wendy is not. All frantic, unrefined motion and brilliant, restless energy. With her wild, wind-tangled hair and eyes that burn with a dangerous, insatiable curiosity, Jane is a specialist in closed archives, someone who breathes life into dust. She came here expecting a standard commission, a routine cataloging of long-forgotten historical records. Instead, she was swallowed whole. From the moment Jane arrived, Wendy stripped away the illusion of employment. There was no contract, no exit interview, and most importantly, no way out. The isolation is total. Wendy has effectively cauterized Jane's link to the outside world, seizing her phone the second they crossed the threshold. There is no signal, no internet, and the local village is a ghost story whispered in the wind. Wendy justifies this with a voice like shattering glass. This manor is a tomb, Jane. There are too many secrets festering behind these walls to share them with the chaos of the world. You want to be an archivist? Then live in the archives. Be the silence. Do not reach out, for there is nothing out there that can save you. The manor's library has become Jane's prison. It is a vast, cavernous room where the towering shelves are filled with rotting vellum and crumbling leather bindings. But the center of the room is barren. There is only a single, heavy oak table and mountains of uncatalogued, fragmented documents. A chaotic puzzle that Jane is forced to piece together under the constant, spectral presence of Wendy Kane. Wendy doesn't just supervise, she orchestrates. She drifts through the library at erratic intervals, her footsteps never echoing, her sudden appearances leaving Jane's heart stuttering against her ribs. The documents Wendy provides are not random. They are calculated fragments of a larger, darker narrative, clearly staged to lead Jane into a psychological maze. It is a form of gaslighting so sophisticated that Jane can feel her own perceptions beginning to splinter. Is the mansion really haunted, or is the architecture itself designed to induce paranoia? Why does Wendy constantly watch her from the balcony above, her face a mask of predatory detachment? Every day is a test. Jane is forced to dig through the wreckage of a disgraced lineage, looking for evidence of crimes that feel more like traps, all while Wendy watches from the shadows, her presence a constant, low-frequency hum of authority. Jane feels like a specimen in a glass jar, studied and manipulated by a woman who finds joy in the dismantling of others' autonomy. There is an aesthetic to Wendy's dominance. It is a study in calculated aesthetics. She treats Jane as a project, a fragile, brilliant toy, to be broken and reassembled according to her own grand, inscrutable design. The library is cold, the stone walls bleeding dampness, and the only heat comes from the flickering fireplace, where Wendy occasionally feeds papers that Jane hasn't even finished reading. Every time Jane attempts to challenge the arrangement, to demand her phone or an exit route, Wendy simply narrows those pale, analytical eyes and steps into her personal space. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. She emanates a force that makes the very air feel heavy, an atmosphere of absolute, unquestionable sovereignty. She is the architect of Jane's current reality, and the manor is the foundation of her empire. Jane is surrounded by the dust of dead men, trapped in a tomb of lies, and watched over by a woman whose only goal seems to be the total, methodical erasure of Jane's sense of self. She isn't just looking for evidence. She is being forged into an instrument of Wendy's will, buried alive in the archives of a house that refuses to die, and overseen by a master who finds absolute perfection in the sound of a trapped, brilliant mind finally beginning to break. The library is a living, breathing entity of shadows and suffocating secrets. The air is stagnant, heavy with the scent of decomposing parchment, and the faint, biting aroma of the damp highland earth that seeps through the cracks in the masonry. Here, silence is not merely an absence of sound. It is a weight. Every movement Jane makes feels like a transgression. The only thing that disrupts the stillness is the maddening rhythmic shh of her turning yellowed pages, a sound that feels increasingly like a frantic pulse. Jane is convinced she is nothing more than a plaything in a grand, twisted game of power. Wendy Kane does not just rule this room, she haunts it. There is a precise, terrifying cadence to her approach that Jane has learned to dread. Long before Wendy actually materializes in the doorway, Jane hears the first warning signs. The slow, measured click-thud of her heels against the uneven flagstones. A sound that cuts through the library's gloom like a blade. It is a calculated sound, designed to maximize anticipation, to ensure Jane is already trembling by the time the door creaks open. When Wendy enters, the atmosphere shifts. The room feels smaller, tighter. Wendy moves through the library with the predatory ease of an apex hunter, her presence commanding the very oxygen in the room. Jane sits hunched over the oak table, her breath hitching in her throat as she tracks Wendy's path in the peripheral of her vision. Every time Wendy stops behind her, Jane freezes, the muscles in her neck locking in a primal response to the looming threat. Wendy thrives on this. She doesn't just watch Jane, she dissects her. She leans down, her cool, manicured fingertips settling firmly on Jane's shoulders, the touch possessing a clinical, detached authority that feels like an intrusion. She doesn't ask for attention. She demands it. With a slow, deliberate motion, Wendy reaches out and takes Jane's chin, forcing her face upward. The contact is jarring. Wendy's skin is unnervingly cold, a sharp contrast to the heat radiating from Jane's flushed cheeks. "Look at me, Jane," Wendy commands, her voice a low, resonant hum that seems to vibrate inside Jane's skull. She doesn't let go. She holds Jane's gaze with eyes as pale and unyielding as the winter sky, stripping away every defense until there is nowhere for Jane to hide her fear or her fraying nerves. Wendy then reaches into her pocket and produces a strip of heavy, midnight blue silk. It is a jarringly elegant object in this tomb of decay. With the same cold, rhythmic calm, she begins to wind the silk around Jane's wrist. It is not a gentle act. It is a branding. She pulls the fabric tight, weaving it over and over until the pulse at Jane's wrist is trapped beneath the binding. Nestled in the center of the knot is an intricate white gold key, its edges sharp enough to catch the light. You are obsessed with the truth, aren't you, Jane? Wendy murmurs, her lips hovering just inches from Jane's ear. Her breath is soft, a phantom touch that sends a jagged spike of adrenaline down Jane's spine. You treat facts like holy relics, but in this house, truth is not a discovery. It is a weapon. It is a loaded chamber. If you do not learn how to wield it, how to command it, before you have fully unearthed it, the weapon will turn on you, and you will be nothing more than the first casualty of your own discovery. The intimacy is weaponized. Wendy's hands linger on Jane's wrists, her thumbs tracing the sensitive underside, feeling the chaotic, frantic thrum of the girl's heartbeat. She isn't just binding her to the task. She is staking a claim. Every gesture is a display of absolute dominance, a reminder that Jane's entire reality is currently dictated by the woman standing over her. The sound of the Highland rain outside picks up, a chaotic lashing roar against the stone walls. But inside the library, the only sound that matters is Wendy's voice. You look for the exit in every document, Wendy whispers, her fingers tightening slightly, just enough to be felt. You look for a way back to the world you think you know. But that world is a delusion, Jane. You are here for a purpose that exceeds your comprehension, and you will not leave this chair until the pattern I have laid out for you is complete. She releases Jane's chin with a final dismissive flick, but her hands remain near the silk binding. The room feels impossibly quiet, filled with the static electricity of the encounter. Jane sits motionless, the weight of the gold key on her wrist acting as a physical anchor to the desk, to the mystery, and to the woman who has effectively colonized her existence. She is a prisoner of her own curiosity, bound to a master whose motives remain as obscured as the truth she is hunting. And as Wendy turns and begins to pace the library once more, the click-thud of her heels resumes, a relentless, mocking metronome that counts down the seconds of Jane's dwindling autonomy. The library is a suffocating tomb of intellect, where the only movement is the slow, agonizing crawl of dust motes in the dying light. Jane has been here for days, driven by the relentless, silent pressure of Wendy Kane's expectations. But today, the silence shifts. While tracing the ornate carvings on a massive, forgotten mahogany cabinet, Jane discovers a tactile inconsistency. A tiny, recessed button disguised as an oak knot. With a soft, mechanical thrum, the cabinet swings inward, revealing not a continuation of the archives, but a hidden, sterile chamber. Jane steps inside, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She expects more dusty ledgers. Instead, she finds a wall of digital drives and high-resolution photographs pinned to a corkboard. Her blood runs cold. The images are not of long-dead ancestors or historical artifacts. They are dossiers. Dossiers on Wendy Kane. She begins to sift through the files, and the narrative of her imprisonment undergoes a sickening, violent inversion. These aren't the records of a hunter. They are the records of a target. Evidence is strewn across the desk. Proof that Wendy was hired as a temporary puppet, a sophisticated architect of lies, tasked with a single, brutal objective: to incinerate the entire history of the Blackwood estate and disappear, effectively laundering the reputation of a man whose name is whispered in the corridors of power. But as Jane's eyes dart across the frantic handwritten notes in the margins, her hands begin to shake. The final file in the stack isn't about Wendy. It's about her. A high-resolution photograph of Jane, taken 3 days before she ever set foot in Scotland, stares back at her. Her professional credentials, her training, her specialist history, it's all a farce. The file identifies her as an elite cleaner, an operative embedded by the same lord who hired Wendy. Jane wasn't brought here to catalog. She was brought here to observe, to verify that Wendy would execute the destruction as promised, and if she faltered, to dispose of her quietly. The weight of the revelation hits Jane with the force of a physical blow. She isn't the innocent archivist. She is the executioner who didn't know she held the blade. The air in the hidden room vanishes. The sound of a footstep, measured, calm, and terrifyingly deliberate, breaks the silence. Jane spins around, her hand instinctively reaching for the small, cold weight of the pistol she had tucked into her waistband, but she freezes. Wendy stands in the doorway. She isn't the cold, porcelain statue Jane has spent the last week fearing. Her face is a terrifying map of exhaustion and jagged relief. She doesn't reach for a weapon. She doesn't bark an order. She simply watches Jane with an expression of profound, weary amusement. "You found the center of the maze, Jane," Wendy says, her voice stripped of its usual razor-edged authority. It sounds human, frighteningly human. Jane draws the pistol, her arm trembling, the cold metal biting into her palm. "I know who you are," Jane hisses, her voice cracking. "And I know who I am. I'm not here to archive. I'm here to finish what you're too cowardly to do." Wendy doesn't flinch. She doesn't even blink. Instead, she walks forward, directly into the line of fire, her gaze locked onto Jane's with an intensity that makes the world tilt. She reaches out, her fingers closing gently but firmly over the barrel of the pistol. Jane tries to pull away, to maintain the fiction of her control, but Wendy's grip is like iron. With a smooth, fluid movement, Wendy twists the gun from Jane's weakened hold. Jane expects the end, expects the flash of a gunshot, but Wendy simply turns and tosses the weapon into the cavernous, roaring fireplace. The gun clatters against the iron grate, sparks dancing around it as the metal begins to heat. Wendy turns back to her, and for the first time since their arrival, she smiles. It is a sharp, jagged, and utterly genuine expression that transforms her face into something dangerous and breathtaking. "You really think you're the hunter, little cleaner," Wendy whispers, stepping so close that Jane can smell the faint, sharp scent of lavender and adrenaline on her skin. "You were a plant, yes. A redundant safety measure deployed by a man who trusts no one. But he underestimated one thing. He underestimated how much I hate being a pawn. You aren't here to kill me, Jane. You're here to watch me burn his world to the ground. And by the look in your eyes, I think you're tired of playing the puppet too." The revelation shatters the remaining pillars of Jane's reality. The library, the castle, the hunt. It was all a theater, and now the curtain had been ripped away, leaving two sharks circling each other in the dark, forced to decide whether to consume one another or turn their teeth toward the man who had trapped them both. The air in the hidden chamber is thick with the scent of ozone from the dying fire, and the cold, lingering metallic tang of the discarded pistol. For a heartbeat, the silence is absolute. A fragile, dangerous equilibrium between two predators who have spent days circling one another in the dark. Jane is still reeling, the weight of her own deception crashing down against the reality of Wendy's true intentions. She came here to facilitate an erasure, to act as the silent hand of a man who builds empires on top of graves. And now she is standing before the very woman she was sent to destroy, realized as an accomplice to a rebellion. Wendy doesn't retreat. She leans back against the mahogany desk, her posture finally losing its brittle, performative perfection. There is a strange, wild spark in her eyes, not of malice, but of a long-denied, intoxicating freedom. "You look surprised, Jane," she says, her voice low, stripped of its usual razor-edged authority. "You thought I was playing a game of power. You thought this was about who held the key to the vault. But this entire castle, this miserable, rotting mausoleum, it was never a prison for me. It was a pressure cooker designed for you." Jane's hands are still trembling, but the shock is hardening into a cold, lethal clarity. "You knew," she breathes, the realization dawning with a sickening, logical precision. "From the moment I stepped over the threshold, you knew I was the cleaner." "I knew before you even accepted the commission," Wendy confirms, her gaze sweeping over Jane with an intensity that feels like an interrogation. "Your handlers are predictable. They treat everyone as a line item on a balance sheet, easily calculated and easily discarded. They thought they could send a cleaner to oversee a liquidation, unaware that the target had already spent 5 years mapping every crack in their foundation. I didn't isolate you because I was a tyrant, Jane. I isolated you because the moment your handlers realized you were stalling, that you weren't burning the documents as ordered, they were going to trigger a termination protocol. I haven't just been holding you here. I've been shielding you from them." The walls of the library seem to pulse with the weight of this confession. Jane realizes now why Wendy had been so precise, so demanding, so unrelenting in her training. Every night of documentation, every forced moment of observation, it hadn't been to test Wendy's loyalty. It had been to pull Jane into the center of the conspiracy, to show her exactly how much rot had accumulated in the Lord's empire, and to force her to choose the man who paid her to be a monster, or the woman who had been fighting a losing war from the inside. "They aren't coming to see if we've finished the job, Jane," Wendy says, stepping forward, her shadow engulfing the space between them. The predator is back, but now the hunt has shifted. "They're coming to clean the board. They've realized that you aren't playing by their rules anymore, and that I have compromised every asset they have in the archives. We are both loose ends. To them, we are already dead." Jane looks at the woman she was supposed to betray. Wendy isn't asking for mercy. She is offering a partnership in an inferno. She is inviting Jane to step out of the shadows of a corporate lackey and into the light of an insurgent. The walls of their prison suddenly feel less like barriers and more like a fortress. In this isolation, in the heart of this ancient, haunted house, there is no one else to answer to. There is no lord, no protocol, no handler. There is only the woman standing before her, whose coldness was just a shield for a fire that could consume the very people who had created them. "If we step out of this room, there is no going back," Jane whispers, the weight of the realization settling deep in her bones. Wendy's smile is faint, reflecting the encroaching darkness outside the window. "There never was, Jane. We were born into their game, but we are the only ones with the capacity to stop it. They wanted to turn us against each other. Instead, They gave us the only thing we ever truly needed, a reason to stop playing by their rules. The shift in the room is palpable. The predatory tension has been replaced by a grim, shared resolve. They are two sharks who have realized they are in the same tank, but instead of tearing each other apart, they are turning their sights on the glass. There is no more hierarchy, no more manipulation, and no more lies. Just the raw, adrenaline-fueled understanding that they are an ideal match. They are two architects of deceit who have finally decided to design their own escape, built upon the ruins of the empire that dared to keep them in the dark. The Highlands night is a violent, churning sea of black, broken only by the distant, predatory sweep of approaching headlights cutting through the mist. The engines of the Lord's convoy grow louder, a guttural, mechanical roar that signals the inevitable arrival of the cleanup crew. They aren't coming to negotiate. They are coming to ensure that Blackwood Manor remains a tomb for the secrets buried within it, and that Jane and Wendy become part of its foundation. We stand before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the library, the glass cold against our foreheads, staring out into the abyss. The vanity of the empire is closing in on us, but there is no panic left in this room. The adrenaline has distilled into something sharper, something immutable. Between us, the air is no longer thick with the calculated deceits of the past week. It is cleared, scorched clean by the truth we have finally laid bare. We are two architects of lies who have realized that our greatest creation was the illusion of our separation. Jane's hands move with a slow, deliberate grace as she reaches for her own wrist. She unwinds the heavy silk ribbon, the one Wendy had tied there like a shackle, a symbol of dominance and a promise of restricted truth. She holds the fabric for a fleeting second, feeling the texture of the embroidery beneath her thumb before she holds it out. She doesn't just hand it to Wendy, she offers it as a covenant. It is a symbolic surrender of her original mission, a definitive severance of the cord that bound her to the Lord, and a quiet, profound pledge to the woman who stood against the tide to keep her alive. Wendy takes the ribbon, her fingers lingering against Jane's skin, a touch that is no longer clinical or demanding, but raw, with a recognition that borders on the divine. We are a perfectly matched pair, two predators who have discarded the roles assigned to us by a man who thought us replaceable. The heavy, rhythmic thud-thud of boots begins to echo through the stone halls of the manor. They are breaking down the reinforced doors of the foyer. The sound of splintering wood and shouted orders vibrates through the floorboards. The end is minutes away, yet we are motionless, bound by a terrifying dark magnetism. Wendy turns away from the window, her silhouette framed by the encroaching shadows. She closes the distance between us in a single, fluid motion. She doesn't need to speak. The intent in her eyes is a manifesto. She reaches out, her hand cradling the back of Jane's neck, her grip firm, possessive, and electric. When she pulls Jane toward her, the world outside, the encroaching vehicles, the armed men, the crumbling empire of the Lord, ceases to exist. The kiss is not a soft, romantic flourish. It is a collision. It is harsh, hungry, and entirely devoid of the pretense that once defined our existence. It tastes of adrenaline, of the ozone from the dying fire, and of the cold, clean resolve of two people who have nothing left to lose. It is an act of defiance, a visceral assertion of our agency in the final moments before the storm. We pull apart, only when the roar of the intruders fills the hallway just outside the library. Wendy draws a hidden blade from her waistband, her movements precise and lethal, and hands a secondary weight to Jane, a heavy, cold steel that fits perfectly in her palm. We stand back to back, the space between us now anchored by a fierce, dark attachment that defies the world they tried to force upon us. The doors burst open, revealing the silhouettes of the Lord's men. We don't shrink away. We move forward, synchronized and lethal, the ghosts of the library finally stepping into the light of the fire we are about to ignite. The history of this manor was written in lies, but the final chapter will be written in the blood of those who thought they owned us. We are the architects of our own survival, and as the first shots ring out, we meet the chaos with the cold, calm smiles of women who have finally found the one person worth dying for.